Bobby Lee Claremont and the Criminal Element by Jeannie Mobley. Jackson, Mississippi, 12:20 p.m. I passed through the next car and the next, making note as I went of the easy pickings along the way. The dozing lady with wax fruit on her hat and her pocketbook dangling open. The mother with too many children and no attention to spare for her luggage. Taking anything now with nearly 24 hours of travel still ahead of us wasn't a good idea, but it's always good to know the possibilities for later. Although, when I saw a silver cigarette case all but falling out of a napping man's pocket, I admit I helped liberate it. After all, someone so careless didn't deserve such a fine thing, and while I'd never tried smoking, I could see how it might be a good skill for a criminal to pick up. I was picturing myself joining Kelly and his two cronies on the platform for a smoke when I stepped into the lounge car and came face to face with the cronies themselves. The sight of them jarred me out of my daydream and rooted me to the spot. For a moment, we just stared at each other in silence. They were both big men. Now that I was so close to them, I realized just how big, but they were big in different ways. The one who called Mrs. O'Halloran Miss LeBlanc was a massive wall of muscle and bone in a dull suit. The other was squarely built, but paunchy, as if the good life had been softening him up for a few years. His skin had a pasty, greasy look, as if he hadn't crawled out into the sunlight in a good long while. The muscular mountain of a man got to his feet, keeping his eyes on me. "Boss," he said, then waited for instructions. The paunchy man smiled at me with a smile as oily as his skin. "Come on over, kid. We'd like a word with you." The big man cracked his knuckles, and I decided it wasn't a word I wanted to have just now. So I turned and hurried back the way I had come. I ducked into a lavatory in the next coach and waited, but after a few minutes peeking through the crack in the door, I decided they had not pursued. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and stepped back out. I sat down in an empty seat in a different car, making myself invisible until we pulled into Jackson. Lots of folks were getting off to stretch their legs, so I did too. On the platform, the colored folks at the front of the train crowded a thin space near the engine, beyond the whites-only barrier, while the white folks spread out comfortably along the rest. Local vendors of both colors strolled among them, offering matches, newspapers, shoe shines, sandwiches, and candy. My stomach grumbled as I spied the food. It was lunchtime, and all I had eaten that day was the 2 corn pones in the morning. I was feeling mighty empty. I was eyeing the sandwiches and considering expanding my criminal qualifications when Sergeant Hayworth stepped off the train. He glanced around in a way that said he didn't want to be seen, then strode across the platform and into the depot. There was no doubt from that look. He was up to something. I hadn't liked that slippery cop since the moment he'd first called me son, and seeing him trying to slither like a snake in the grass into the station didn't do much to raise my opinion of him. I forgot my empty stomach and followed to see where he was going. Inside, the depot was crowded. All the doors and windows were open to let through a breeze, but the air was too damp and heavy to move. The ladies sitting on the benches looked flushed, even though they fanned themselves vigorously. The men had taken off jackets and loosened ties, but their faces still gleamed with sweat. The only folks with any spunk were a group of kids running in and out among the waiting travelers and generally kicking up a ruckus. It took me a moment to locate the sergeant. He had barged in ahead of a whole line at the ticket counter to talk to the ticket agent. The folks in line were all glaring like he was a polecat in a henhouse, but I couldn't have been happier. I thought he was buying a ticket back to New Orleans. Soon, though, I saw I was mistaken. He wasn't buying anything. He spoke to the ticket agent for a moment, then the agent opened a door and the sergeant disappeared into the railroad office. I didn't know what business he had in there, but I figured he'd be occupied for a spell, so I turned to the golden opportunity I'd seen in the crowded station. I looked around, locating my target. Then I strolled forward until I was in the path of the kids playing tag. When they came charging past, I let them sweep me up into the chase, shouting and laughing as I joined them. We went weaving through the crowd as if the devil himself was on our heels. Near the door to the platform, A lady was buying a paper from a boy, and her pocketbook was dangling open as she counted out pennies in her hand. As the crowd of kids flew past, I took a clumsy zag to the left and bumped her hard enough to jolt the coins out of her palm and a few more out of her open pocketbook. I was a few steps past her before I could stop, which gave her time to get up a good head of steam. "See here, you little hooligan," she shouted. "Sorry, ma'am," I said, turning back. I bent to help her gather up the coins and bobby pins that had spilt from her bag, while she continued to scold and complain. I kept muttering apologies, but I made no effort to quiet her. Upstanding ladies like to indulge their indignation once in a while, and I was happy to oblige her. Once she was worked up, she wasn't so likely to notice that, while gathering up her spilled effects, I had placed my foot neatly atop a coin. I handed her back her things, apologizing yet again and promising to mend my ways. She chastised me one last time while I hung my head in remorse. Then she marched away, her nose up in the air. When she was gone, I squatted down to tie my shoelace and to scoop up the coin beneath my foot. I slid my foot sideways to reveal a whole quarter. It was my lucky day. I picked it up and took a moment to enjoy the weight of it on my palm before I slipped it into my pocket. Then I straightened. A glance back over my shoulder showed me Sergeant Hayworth emerging from the railroad office. I figured that was my signal to head for the train. No point being in the station should the lady realize she had lost some money. "You're one smooth operator," a voice said as I stepped onto the platform. I turned toward the compliment, hoping it had come from one of the crooks in my car. Maybe he'd seen my con and wanted to take me under his wing. But instead, it was only the two colored boys who'd helped me up back in New Orleans. They were taking one heck of a risk. They were on the narrow section of the platform where whites and blacks mingled between their separate cars and separate waiting rooms. But the boys were dangerously close to the entrance to the whites-only area. Not that it bothered me none, but there were plenty of white folks who could take offense. And things never came out so good for black folks once white folks took offense, far as I could tell. The older boy was leaning against the depot wall beside the door, his hands tucked into his overall bib. The younger one, Terence, was grinning ear to ear. "Beg pardon?" I said. Innocence was my best defense if they were thinking of turning me in. "Does your Yankee aunt know you're a thief?" the older kid said. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, and I began walking toward the train, stiff-backed and indignant. I was plenty annoyed. I had planned to use my money to buy sandwiches from the carts on the platform, but I didn't dare show up the money now, not in front of two boys ready to make a scene. Not when Sergeant Hayworth himself had just come out onto the platform. If it came to my word against theirs, white against black, I had the advantage, unfair as that was. But there was no point in pushing my luck. Terence began trotting along after me. "Don't be sore," he said. "I think if you're going to be an operator, you ought to be a smooth one. Least that's what our pop says. Can you teach me how to do that?" I shrugged and kept walking. "Ain't nothing to teach you, 'cause I ain't done nothing," I said, falling into the comfortable street talk Sister Mary Magdalene so strongly objected to, but was more fitting for a shady character such as myself. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Sergeant Hayworth angling across the platform toward the same door as me. I certainly didn't want to arrive at that door at the same time as a copper, while trailing a little kid who was jabbering on about smooth operators. So I stopped walking and turned to the boy. To my surprise, his older brother had trailed along too, a few steps behind us. I glared at them both. "What do you want from me?" I said quietly, making sure my back was toward Hayworth so he wouldn't see or hear what I was saying. I was hoping he just wouldn't notice me, but if he did, I wanted him to think we were just a bunch of kids playing together. Of course, I had outgrown child's play, but it was a safe thing for Hayworth to assume. The older boy grinned, a little wickedly. "Well, now, that's a mighty good question," he said. "For starters, me and Terence here are getting a little hungry. It's lunchtime. So buy yourself a sandwich," I said, waving toward one of the sandwich carts on the platform. "Can't," the younger boy said. "That's for white folks only." "Which is where you come in," the older boy said. I eyed him coolly. Seems to me you're the smooth operator here. I saw you go into the baggage car and not come back out in Hammond. I suppose you were stealing back there, too." He stiffened and his grin wilted away. "I was working," he said. "Yeah? I don't see anyone else your age working for the Illinois Central." "You won't tell, will you?" little Terence said. "Hush up, Terence," his brother said. "Ain't nothing to tell. I was working." "And I'm just taking the air," I said, challenging him with my look. I glanced over my shoulder. Hayworth had stopped and was talking to someone near the door to our train carriage. I still couldn't get by him without being seen. I had to lose these boys, and quick. The older boy followed my glance and, seeing my expression, jumped once again to the offensive. "You nervous?" he said. "Why should I be nervous?" I tried to sound casual, but he wasn't buying it. "That there is a long arm of the law, and you're keeping a mighty close eye on him for someone who ain't done nothing. Maybe me and Terence should go have a word with him." The threat had been meant for me, but the younger boy crowded against his brother, gripping his hand. "I don't want to talk to no policeman, Leon. Don't make me." "And maybe I should tell him about you being in the baggage car," I said. Leon shrugged, but I could see I had him. I didn't know what his story was, but I sure now it wasn't on the up and up. He wouldn't talk to the cop. I'd called his bluff. "We won't tell the cop or nothing, will we, Leon?" Terence said. "We want to be friends, is all." "Then why you trying to shake me down?" I said, still glaring at Leon. He glared back. We stood like that for several seconds before the train whistle blew, warning everyone it was time to get on board. All around us, passengers began to surge toward the train. Leon broke eye contact first, turning to Terence and taking his hand. "See, I told you it was a bad idea. We're better off on our own. We don't need some gutter snipe from the quarter to have fun. Come on." Together they started forward, toward the colored cars at the front of the train. But Terence pulled his hand free and turned to me. "We're sorry. We didn't mean nothing by it," he said in a plaintive voice. His eyes going big and irresistibly sweet as he looked up at me through his long curving lashes. He was a smooth operator, too, by the look of things. And from their accent, I could tell they weren't exactly from the best ward in New Orleans, either. "You should come eat lunch with us. We got a proposition for you, right, Leon?" "Proposition," Leon corrected him. "Come join us in the lounge car," Terence persisted. "It's that one there." He pointed to the last car in the Negro section of the train. "I can't eat in the colored car," I said. "Sure you can," Terence said. "The food's just fine, and it's cheaper than what they serve in the white folks' dining car. Granddaddy says that's the best kept secret on the Illinois Central." "I ain't colored," I pointed out, though it was as plain as the freckled nose on my face. Leon had guessed right. My mother was from the French Quarter, and although I knew nothing about my daddy, my skin was too fair and my hair too sandy for him to have been a Creole or a Negro. "Just tell him Leon and Terence sent you," Leon said. "If you want to hear our proposition, that is. I don't care one way or the other. Come on, Terence." With that, he took the little boy's hand more firmly and led him off toward the colored cars. Relieved to be free of them, I turned back toward my own car, hurrying as I did. I nearly collided with Sergeant Hayworth at the train steps. "Well, hello, son, taking the air, were you?" the sergeant said. "Yes, sir, and you?" He nodded and patted his pink, sweaty forehead with his handkerchief. "I think it's going to be a hot one. You're wise to enjoy it while you can before the heat gets to be too much, if you know what I mean," he said. I didn't know exactly, but from the cold smirk he gave me as he mounted the steps to our car, I wasn't sure I wanted to find out.